A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. This quote is directly from the President of the United States on Truth Social, talking about Iran after days of exploitative-filled messages, talking about how much he's going to destroy the nation, blow them up, and as he would say, make it hell on earth. And of course, this comes after 5.5 weeks of some of the most intense bombing campaigns the United States has ever done. It seemed that President Trump wanted to bring hell upon earth to the Iranian regime. But 88 minutes before the deadline on Tuesday, there was announced that there was a ceasefire in place and that they had actually reached an agreement of some sort. This ceasefire was helped reach by the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir, who were both able to talk to the United States and Iran to be able to bring them together to quote-unquote create a collective agreement on where they can start negotiating. And on the surface, this looks like it's going to bring to an end the largest fight the United States has brought to another nation in the last 25 years. Why does Trump think he can declare mission accomplished, and what does it really look like? Can Trump say he's won in Iran, and talking about does Iran also have the ability to say that they won as well? And this is what I wanted to be able to cover today. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of Casualities, and we're going to get into it talking about did Trump win in Iran? Look, I know that there have been so many ceasefire violations that it's become obvious that both Iran and the United States didn't communicate to each other exactly what were the requirements to meet a ceasefire, that it seems like Israel was left out of the whole process and they didn't know any of this was happening. But let's just assume, at least for the next week from the start of the ceasefire on Tuesday going forward to next Tuesday, hopefully, that it stays in place. So I know there's a lot of issues and violations going on with the ceasefire. Number one, it looks like both the United States and Iran weren't clear with each other what the actual prerequisites for a ceasefire were. It looks like Israel wasn't even told about the ceasefire until well after it already happened. It looks like no one had mentioned Lebanon to anyone about the ceasefire. And this seems like it's just a general issue that is going on and it won't last. Now, this video is not about the ceasefire because to be completely frank, that's a little bit too messy to really make a video for me about. I can't put out videos fast enough. It takes me a few days to edit these because I got a lot of other commitments. So I can't talk about that in great depth because it's probably going to be gone in about a week. But my hope is from Tuesday to Tuesday, that week where the ceasefire will hopefully hold, that we can talk about has Trump won. And we're going to talk about the 4 victory aims that he had set out, and these are going to be the conditions on which we set to see if the United States had won. Now, number one, we need to talk about objectives. Objectives are what wars are about. There's no, oh, we did this much, so we've won. No, if the objectives have been achieved, the war's won. If they have not, the war's lost. Number two, wars for the most part throughout history aren't absolute victories. Everyone talks about World War II or the Civil War where the enemy was entirely defeated in perpetuity and completely wiped off the map. That's just simply not the reality of most wars. That is something where you come to negotiate an agreement. The other side has certain objectives and penalties put on them, but they continue to survive in a weakened state. That is fairly common for wars, and that is how we're going to look through this lens as well. And number three, we're going to talk about the spectrum of the different objectives, because some can be completely taken care of, some are partially taken care of in favor of one side, and some can be not taken care of at all. So without further ado, we've talked enough about that. Let's get into it. So America's first aim in the war, and the most important one, is eliminating Iran's missile research and building capacity. So essentially, you can talk about nuclear bombs or other sort of weapons that Iran can deliver around the world no matter what. So the first aim that we're going to talk about is the elimination of Iran's missile production and research capabilities. Now, you can talk about nuclear bombs and delivering missiles and chemical weapons wherever you want. However, Just as important as those weapons are, the delivery systems are just as important. And this is what we want to be able to focus on with Iran, because if they get the bomb, their ability to be able to deliver it to Israel, to deliver it to Europe, is just as important as them being able to develop the weapon itself. And we've actually seen these capabilities exercised throughout the war, because first off, you see that they yeet a ton of munitions across the entire Gulf region, just dropping them wherever they want to across the Gulf and essentially hitting deep into the Middle East wherever they want to. But not only have they had the stockpiles to be able to send those missiles elsewhere, they also have shown off that they have much greater capabilities as well. And there's two perfect examples of this. The first example is going to be on October 31st, 2023. The Houthi rebels in northern Yemen launched a Qadr missile into the atmosphere, shooting it up at an extremely high angle. It went hypersonic immediately through the lower atmosphere, thus pushing it through the entire stratosphere to the point where it actually leaves Earth's atmosphere and enters space. At the same time, an Israeli Iron Dome defense system notices this missile and launches their own missile that leaves the atmosphere as well. This Houthi missile is thus intercepted in space, marking the first time in world history that space combat has happened. And of course, this isn't much talked about. Israel posted the footage of this actual interaction, but it's hard to believe that a group like the Houthi rebels, who are a small rebel group in northern Yemen and one of the poorest regions of one of the poorest countries, has the capabilities to do this. Now, Iran isn't the wealthiest country in the world, but they have a dedicated department of science and researching how to send hypersonic missiles into space that has been well funded for decades now. And this is very obvious that this is not from the Houthis themselves, but is something that their patron Iran has provided them. The second example happened on March 20th of this year. 2 long-range missiles were shot in southern Iran, and they were aimed at Diego Garcia military base, which is a small sea atoll shared by the Americans and the British, trying to be able to place long-range bombers within enough range of Iran to be able to bomb them. They thought that being on that atoll, that they would be safe from any kind of attack from Iran. Iran wanted to showcase that that's not true. So they launched these rockets from a couple hundred miles within Iran, going over 4,000 miles away to Diego Garcia. Now, one missile missed the mark. The other missile was intercepted by the United States. But it is sending a very clear message. If you look at that range of that missile system, sure, it may fall harmlessly into the Indian Ocean if it's shot at a U.S. military base, but if you go in the opposite direction on the other side of Iran, that puts all of Berlin, Paris, and London within range of these missiles, sending a very clear message to the world that if this war does not end, it can become Europe's problem as well. And you have to think about that. If they can get to Western Europe, getting to Tel Aviv with any kind of weaponry is child's play. So how do you take care of this missile capability? How do you remove it? Well, you take the man who has done it before. John Dan Raisin Kane was one of the commanders put in charge of destroying Iraq's missile capacity back in 2003 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was also put in charge of Inherent Resolve, where for 2 years we hunted down ISIS positions and pushed them back across northern Iraq and Syria. He has experience in doing this, and he was the man for the job to be able to put this together. And as soon as he was appointed Chief of Staff of the United States Armed Forces, it seems like he immediately set to work putting together a strategy to be able to destroy Iran's military-industrial complex, their missile capabilities, and all other possible weapons Iran can reach. And of course, the results of this is General Raisin Kane immediately set about destroying their stockpiles, their industrial base, and all the launchers that Iran has. During the first weeks of the war, he destroyed their capabilities of being able to launch drones and missiles by 90%. And it is estimated that Iran roughly has half their missiles still left in stock, but that's not the issue. We primarily went after those launchers, which Iran either has a hard time replacing or just can't replace at all. And it is believed that their launching capacity is down to between 25 to 35%. The variance there is only determined by whether you consider the launchers that have been buried underground as still usable or not, and it'll take many weeks to get those out because they're just buried underground. But again, Iran's launching capability has been severely reduced. This also has been done very quietly, but he has significantly and permanently destroyed a lot of Iran's defensive industrial base to make it impossible for them to domestically produce drones and missiles. but it is still believed that Iran has the capability to make large strikes across the Gulf. Sources within CENTCOM had stated that they believe it would take roughly 2 months more of combat actions to be able to entirely reduce Iran's missile capabilities. Now, they say that this is definitely something achievable by the United States military, but it is going to be that long process that takes a lot of diligent work and time to be able to successfully do. It's something that would take months and months of work, and something that if we want to be able to make sure it happens, it needs to be done thoroughly. And on the military-industrial base side, even though Iran has lost the capability to domestically produce those weapons, it has planned ahead for that because they understood the ability of America's air power. They want to be able to have fail-safes. And the way that they've done that is they built factories in both Tajikistan and Russia. So overall, Iran's missile capabilities are severely limited, but they are not gone. However, it's to the point where many believe that and this is probably not going to be done by the United States, it's most likely going to be done by Israel. If a kind of mowing the lawn strategy is implemented here, it is believed that those limited capabilities will be kept at bay for a long, long time. So overall, grading this, the United States has partially achieved this objective more in favor of the United States than Iran. Second war aim. Make it impossible for Iran to obtain a nuclear bomb. And I remember growing up hearing all about this, and it seems like every single time you hear a news report about Iran, they're 2 weeks away from being able to develop the weapon. And we've been hearing this since 2007, probably even earlier than that. I just remember watching the news in 2007 and them talking about it. But it is genuinely believed that Iran has the know-how to be able to build the weapon. They just need to be willing to spend the $1 billion or so and the resources necessary to build it. They currently have enriched uranium that is at 60% enrichment. To be able to get it to nuclear bomb levels, you need to have it at roughly 90%. That seems like they're still a long way off. However, this scale is not linear. It is much harder to get from 2% enrichment to 5% enrichment than it is to get from 60% enrichment to 90% enrichment, which is why many people say they know how to do it. They just have to put the money forward to be able to make it happen. So the know-how is there. They just need to be able to put the time and effort to actually make it happen. On the other side, for the United States and Israel, they know exactly where the uranium is. They can point it out. In fact, we know that it is in this research corridor from Isfahan to Natanz to Fordo is where all of these sites are. So you might be thinking, why don't we just send in special operations forces to get it? After all, if we're able to kidnap a president of a semi-large country that is opposed to the United States, why can't we just get a few tubes of uranium? Well, unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. And even though it might not be that simple, we have just proven with the downed F-15 pilot and weapons operator that we are able to put troops in Iran, unbeknownst to the Iranian regime, land a lot of resources on the ground, and be able to have them move around without anyone knowing. Well, unfortunately, because of the war and the damage that has been done to those nuclear facilities, it will not be that simple. These facilities are buried under roughly 330 feet of gravel, rock, limestone, everything, you name it. It's just buried deep underground. Most of their entrances have been closed off because the United States tried to bomb them with bunker busters. They couldn't reach the facilities, but the entrances and the routes to them have just been completely obliterated. So we can't get to them unless we have a minor invasion to push into this land, hold the ground for several weeks that would take to do the mining and excavation. Without even mentioning, where are we going to find the miners that are willing to go in and actually build the tunnels to get down there to be able to destroy the uranium and get out of there? Unless the CIA or Mossad have found a way to get into these facilities without actually having to dig, which is very possible, not going to rule that out. If there's anyone that would know, it's them. But to move that kind of earth is impossible. So without a secret entrance being discovered, this option just really is impossible. Now, Iran won't have access to those facilities until they dig them up, but that's only a matter of weeks. And once the bombs stop falling and once the bullets stop flying, that's going to be a fairly straightforward operation for them to do, and they can get back to the research where they left off. And the final note on that is that if we do a land invasion, we don't have the capabilities there to even push this, because we do have Marine Raider units that can push this area, but you got to again remember this research corridor is in the direct smack dab middle of the country. They don't have the capabilities to hold land that long, and we could not hold land that far inland unless we are just doing a general invasion to take over the country. And at that point, you're just toppling the regime. So unless you get to that point, this is entirely pointless conversation to have. So thus we can say with the results, without a change in the ceasefire and some sort of concession from Iran about these facilities, they will continue to be able to develop a bomb. And that is something that I know is unacceptable to Israel in particular, because they don't want there to be a bomb drop on Tel Aviv and roughly a quarter of its population killed in an instant. So this is probably going to be the big breaking point for the Iranian regime, because they're not going to give that up, because they know that that is one of their biggest pieces of leverage in this entire conversation. So ultimately, the results of that is entirely failure on the United States' part and a huge win for the Iranian objective. And the only way that that changes is with regime change, which we will talk about later. The third war aim, destroying Iran's navy. Now this one's a lot more clear-cut because Iran only had a 30-vessel navy to begin with, and the biggest issue was mine layers. That was the biggest fear, and Iran was only able to get off expected between 6 to 30 mines in the Strait of Hormuz before their entire mine-laying capabilities were destroyed. All the mine layers destroyed, all their destroyers, cruisers, everything like that, anything of any significance has been destroyed. The Iranian fleet sits at the bottom, partially because of the first ever torpedoing done by a submarine by the United States since 1945, and the first time since 1982 the world over. And this is again showing that America's actual military dominance is still very much there. It can destroy a lot of Iranian material, and navies are just frankly hard to hide. The only part of the Iranian Navy that really survived was these IRGC small boats that are going and attacking these shipping vessels, and those can be fairly easily hunted down by A-10 Warthogs and other fighter bombers, but they're just easy to produce, easy to hide, and most of them only go out at night anyways, so it's really a cat and mouse game. But for all intents and purposes, the Iranian Navy has been destroyed. It's just that Iran has found other ways to be able to shut down the strait and make companies fear sending their ships through there. So even though this objective's results is entirely a complete U.S. success, they have accomplished this objective. The reason why the objective was there in the first place seems to not really have actually worked out, but we're going to talk about a little bit about that later. Fourth war aim, ending Iran's support for their proxies. As many of you will know, this entire conflict started back when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. And since then, it has spiraled into this large conflict. And for most of that conflict's history, it has not gone particularly well for Iran. Israel has systematically removed and degraded its proxies one after another. At first, it attacked Hamas, destroyed it in Gaza, then it went north and decapitated most of Hezbollah. While this was happening, rebels took their shot in Syria and were able to overthrow the Assad regime, cutting off the land bridge from Iran to their Hezbollah and Hamas patrons. Iran's two other proxies, the Popular Mobilization Forces and the Houthis, were both destroyed in huge bombing campaigns by the United States, joined in by Israel. So by the time you get to the eve of this war, most of Iran's proxies have been severely degraded. The only ones that really maintain any control whatsoever are the Houthis, and even then, they've launched a few rockets at Israel and they haven't done anything else. They especially do not want to attack shipping to get pounded by the United States again. So this is where Iran is left, where their proxies offer no real resistance. But Israel understands unless Iran's regime is removed, those proxies will continue to receive support. And this is where we can honestly say that nothing has changed whatsoever on this war aim, because the only way to be able to bring it about is through regime change. So we can honestly say the grade on this is a failure, at least right now. Because unless there is some sort of regime change in Iran, this will continue to be a failure. The money will continue to flow to Iran's proxies. The United States can try and intercept as many shipments, as many different things as they want to, but unless the regime is gone, somehow, some way, stuff is going to get to their proxy networks, and they're going to try to continue to expand it. So now bringing all those war aims together, we can show that the United States has had success in one, partial success in another, and has failed on two different fronts. And ultimately, all those war aims rested on regime change. And that brings us to the question, why did Trump think he could change the regime in Iran? And with a little digging, we can see why. A New York Times article reports that in 2021, when David Barnea became the head of Mossad, he decided that they were going to invest a lot more resources in Iran to be able to overthrow their regime, or at least get them into position they can affect the regime greatly. He started pouring in those resources, and when you fast forward to 2024, you have Barnea approach Netanyahu and say that he believes they are able to overthrow the regime in Iran. After much coaxing, he is able to convince Netanyahu that this is possible, especially when the protests in Iran in December really start growing and take over the country, becoming some of the largest protests we have seen in my lifetime. With all of this going on, Netanyahu and Barnea approach Trump. They say that they can overthrow the Iranian regime and be able to make a huge change in the region to bring some lasting peace by taking Iran out of the equation, thus giving Saudi Arabia the total upper hand in the Cold War and bringing possible peace between the Jews and Arabs in the region. And according to this report, Trump liked the idea. However, he wanted to consult his own intelligence community about this. And John Crawford, the director of the CIA, came up to him and said that this is a terrible idea, it's folly, and it's most likely not going to work. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just had a one-word response saying that it's male cow feces. Fortunately, we can't say exactly what it is because this is a family-friendly show that talks about war here. And General David Petraeus, the man who probably has the most competency, experience, and knowledge of the actual cultural understanding and the patronage systems that work in Iran, the man that has more experience with this than anyone else in America, said that this would most likely not work. So with all these people high up in the American intelligence community saying no, Trump was still able to be convinced by Netanyahu and Barnea that this would be possible. And there's some credence to this. You can look at both Iran's history of protests and what was going on at that time. Iran almost has annual protests that bring the country to the brink. It's been the hijab riots, it's been the water riots, and now it is these riots done by what is essentially Iran's middle class of business owners that actually have some influence. Unfortunately, the United States couldn't do anything at that time to act because they were involved in the special Maduro operation in Venezuela. So when things reached their zenith, Trump told the Iranian protesters, "Hold on, help is on the way." And something that neither Barnea, Netanyahu, or Trump realized is that it was probably too little, too late. Because on January 8th, Iran turned off all of its internet access and started a massive repressive killing spree. It is estimated that 36,000 protesters were killed by the regime in 48 hours, crushing any and all resistance to the regime. And in spite of this, Trump thought that they would be able to overthrow Iran because of how unpopular the regime has become. But they didn't give very much credence or thought to the fact that the regime was able to crack down and stop these protests in 48 hours. They probably have a very strong grip and a consolidated control over the country. But still, the bombs fell on February 28th. And after the first week of bombings, nothing happened. There were celebrations of Khamenei's death, but those celebrations were quickly crushed by paramilitary militias that went out and hunted down those that were organizing celebrations. And something not covered by the media very much is people also were arrested en masse when the war kicked off, with Iran trying to head off any chance of major protests or any kind of revolution happening within the country. So because of this, the United States turned to trying to bombing all the provinces with major ethnic minorities. However, this also did not work out because Iran has a strong sense of national identity. Yes, they have different languages, different ethnicities, different religions, but they all view themselves as Iranian. I mean, you can just look at the fact that the president of Iran is Azerbaijani, same as the supreme leader, and many of their high-ranking members are Kurdish, Lars, other minorities from the country. It is just purely a country built on theocratic rule. So with this pivot, the United States had failed. So it looks like Trump was trying to pivot to a different strategy where he wanted to be able to utilize a soft regime change. So they started targeting a lot of IRGC officers because after the death of Khamenei, it looks like they took control and were the dominant institution in the country. So they were the ones that had to be taken out for regime change. And one after another inside the IRGC were killed and absolutely obliterated. And it appeared that Trump would go and pin his hopes on Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, taking the new leadership role and really taking the reins over the country to be able to have a force, to be able to have someone who's less radical and wants to reform things within the country. And there's even some proof of this. Pezeshkian made a large speech where he apologized for bombing the Arab countries and said that they would never do it again. He would also put out a list of demands for the war to end, which most of them were very mild and something that can honestly be kind of negotiated, whereas they asked for reparations that could really be economic help to be able to help the country recover. Recognizing sovereignty could be the United States guaranteeing that they would not do anything with Iran and open up economic aid to them if they abandoned their nuclear and missile regime. But ultimately, the fractures are there, and it seems that the IRGC has cemented a lot of its command in its local regions. Because after Pezeshkian said this, they immediately launched strikes on the Gulf states, proving what he has said is wrong, and they said that these demands are not harsh enough and they will not let the war end. And combine this with what is going on in the Strait of Hormuz, where they completely shut it down, and Iran has actually achieved most of its war aims by cutting off the world's supply of oil and LNG from the Gulf, that they have the upper hand and leverage right now. So this made it possible that the regime change just wasn't going to happen. And even this ceasefire seems to have been done in a very kind of iffy way, because Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, was the one that Trump was negotiating with, and there's actually a lot of belief that these negotiations were made up, but it's come out that Ghalibaf was the one he was talking to. Israel took him off his kill list, and he is one of the leaders of the civilian government. But the IRGC is begrudgingly going along with them for the ceasefire, and the IRGC has done a lot to make sure that if anything happens, they're able to maintain their leverage in the Strait of Hormuz and will force whatever kind of demands they want on the United States. For instance, something not reported is that we have given $6 billion of frozen assets to Iran. I say all this in a really fast motion just to say regime change has not happened. And unless we go into Iran or find some other way to be able to replace them, even a soft regime change is not possible. The IRGC is in control, and thus war aims cannot be met unless they are removed. So unless something dramatic happens where Pezeshkian's able to take full control of the country, or we launch an invasion to be able to overthrow the regime, or some popular support comes out of nowhere, it does not seem like these aims will be accomplished in any meaningful sense. We can definitively say that Trump has not achieved his aims, and thus by that definition, he has not won the war in Iran whatsoever, and there's a lot of work to do for that to be changed. But until we get to that point, that's all I have to say. Let me know what you think will happen next. Let me know what you liked about this episode. And until next time, bye for now.